So my story, I'm a writer, and I wrote this a bit ago. It's a bit of a nostalgia fest. It's about the place that I grew up, and the people who lived there really liked it. I hope you guys do too. My first memory is when I'm 3 years old. I'm about 2 miles away from Panola, the place where I was born, at a friend's house. I'm in my friend's bedroom and I'm crying. I'm crying because I'm away from home for the first time that I can remember, and my mom's not there, and I guess things just aren't okay. And Arlene Reif, my parents' friend, comes upstairs and she picks me up, and I remember her carrying me downstairs, and she feeds me cereal, and she tells me everything is going to be okay. I go home 2 days after that to my house in Panola, and I have a new sister. Her name's Betsy. I don't have a solid canon of memories for several years after that, but I can remember sitting on the picnic table in our backyard, snapping green beans as my mom read stories to us. Stories that were picked out for my older siblings, Madeline Engel's A Wrinkle in Time, or maybe the Chronicles of Narnia. Stories that were a little bit above my head, but made me excited to be there and be listening. I remember looking out across the pines behind my neighbors, the Martins' house, to the cornfields where my childhood happened. The Martins were my neighbors. There were 3 boys and 2 girls, and we played and played together all the time. In the cornfields and the rock breaks, we built forts, and we played knights, and we whittled swords, and it was magical. When I was about 8 years old, we had a new neighbor who moved in, the Kennedys, and they were different. They came from Ireland, and all the kids had blonde hair. There was Evangeline and Molly, and Katie and Cameron and Aubrey. And I remember thinking how cool Cameron and Aubrey were because they had mountain bikes, and I wanted a mountain bike because I was 8. I remember sitting in a tree with Molly, and the air was crisp and cool, kind of like it is right now in September, and it was morning, and she told me this was what Ireland felt like. And I remember that feeling till today, that feeling in Panola when the air was crisp and cool. And I'd never been to Ireland, but I kind of knew what it was like. When I was about 11 years old, my brother and I started working for a few weeks in the summer for a cantaloupe farmer down past Orrstown. And we picked cantaloupes early in the day. That man was so generous. He paid us $11.50 an hour, and I saved up a couple $100, and I bought my first bike. And that bike was freedom. It let me go the places I wanted to go and do the things I wanted to do, and move a little bit away from Panola, out into the world where I could grow. A little bit later on, maybe a few years, I got my first real job. I was a dairy hand at a farm out right south of, or north of Letterkenny Army Depot. And I wasn't a good worker, but that bike took me there. And the farmers who worked there taught me how to work, how to milk cows and harvest feed and birth calves and do all the things that were important to them and became important to me. But they taught me how to work, how to be a person in the world, and that's important. I remember riding my bike from around Letterkenny to Orrstown and depositing my paychecks and feeling so proud that I was making it in the world. When I was about 16, next to our little greenhouse in Panola, some new neighbors moved in. They were the Lathams, and Shannon Latham was a man like I've never met before. He was kind of wild, a little bit crazy, but he could use words in a way that nobody else had. They flowed and bounced and moved like poetry or music, and I was enamored with him because he was different. And he owned a Ford Ranger pickup truck, and I didn't think much of Fords at that time because of the biases of my brothers and father. And I said to Shannon, "Why would you buy a Ford truck if you could get any truck that you wanted?" And Shannon said, well, I don't like Ford trucks either, but God keeps on putting them in my path and I can't get around them. The Lathams moved away that fall. And I remember Shannon coming to me and saying that he needed to sell his truck. And he offered it me at a deal that nobody could have refused. And so somehow God put that truck in my life just like he had Shannon's. I named that truck Doug. And having that truck was what made it so I really moved away from the place that was home. I got a job in Chambersburg at a dairy processing plant. And I started spending less time at home, more time at my girlfriends or at my friends. I had a friend, Zach, who I'd worked with for many years. Zach and I would swim down in the quarry behind the fields there in Panola. And I helped Zach do all kinds of things, fix his house. And we worked together, and I was moving away from home. When I was 18, my parents sold that house in Panola, the house that I had partially abandoned. And they moved to Carlisle Springs. But their new house didn't feel like home. It only felt that way when all our family was gathered there on the holidays, and it was full. I moved out of my parents' home in Carlisle a bit after that, and I've lived in many places since. But none of them have been a home. They've been places that I lived, or maybe places that I hung my hat. But home is that place in Panola where all those memories are. I've driven through there before, and it's so different. The only folks who live there still are the Martins. And I worry that there aren't still kids playing in the cornfields and on the rock breaks. I'm afraid to swim in the quarry because I'm afraid it wouldn't be the same, that I wouldn't feel the same. You know, I don't want to be Peter Pan. I love adulthood just as much as childhood, but here's the thing. It takes a village to raise a child, a place where a kid can be free, a place where there's other mothers who will hold you and feed you cereal and tell you that everything's going to be okay, a place where your friends can tell you what somewhere far away like Ireland smells like, and a place where a crazy old man can teach you how God brings things into your life. Thank you.